She was just 12 years old, walking through the dusty streets in her finest leather shoes. But in 3 minutes, those same shoes would be on the feet of a stranger, and her life would never be the same again. Cora Whitman stepped carefully around the wooden planks scattered near the general store, her polished brown shoes catching the midday sun. The leather was smooth and unblemished, a rare luxury in this frontier town where most children ran barefoot through the dirt. Her father Fletcher had spent good money on those shoes, trading 2 weeks of grain supplies to get them from a traveling merchant. The main street bustled with its usual afternoon rhythm. Horses snorted at hitching posts, their riders conducting business in low voices. Women in faded dresses hurried between shops, clutching their purchases close. The air carried the mingled scents of leather, dust, and the distant smoke from the blacksmith's forge. Cora was heading toward her father's trading post when she noticed him. An elderly native man, his weathered face etched with deep lines, limped slowly down the center of the street. His left leg dragged slightly with each step, and his feet were completely bare against the rough, sun-baked earth. The soles looked cracked and bleeding from the sharp stones and thorns that littered the ground. Most people stepped aside as he passed, some averting their eyes, others watching with guarded curiosity. The old man's clothes were simple but clean, his long gray hair braided with small leather ties. Despite his obvious pain, he carried himself with a dignity that made Cora stop walking entirely. She watched as he paused near the water trough, steadying himself against the wooden edge. His breathing was labored, and she could see him wince with each movement. The sight of his injured feet against the harsh ground made something twist uncomfortably in her chest. Without thinking, Cora found herself walking toward him. Her heart pounded as she approached, unsure of what to say or do. The old man looked up as she drew near, his dark eyes meeting hers with a mixture of surprise and wariness. For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the busy street seemed to fade around them. Cora looked down at her pristine shoes, then back at his bare, wounded feet. The contrast struck her like a physical blow. "Sir," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the street noise, "your feet look like they hurt something fierce." The elderly man studied her face carefully as if trying to read her intentions. When he spoke, his voice was soft but carried the weight of years. "The ground is hard, little one, but these old feet have walked harder paths." Cora glanced around nervously. People were beginning to notice their interaction, some slowing their pace to watch. She could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken questions hanging in the air. But the sight of the man's pain overshadowed her discomfort. "I have shoes," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Good ones. They might fit you." The old man's eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise flickering across his weathered features. "Child, you cannot give away your shoes. Your family would not understand." But Cora was already kneeling in the dust, her small fingers working at the leather laces. The shoes had been her pride and joy just moments before, but now they seemed insignificant compared to the man's obvious suffering. As she pulled them from her feet, the warm dirt immediately pressed against her stockings. "Here," she said, standing and holding the shoes out to him. "Please take them. They're sturdy and will protect your feet." The elderly man stared at the offered shoes, then back at her face. Something profound passed between them in that moment, an understanding that transcended words. Slowly, almost reverently, he accepted the shoes. "What is your name, generous child?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Cora Whitman. My father runs the trading post down the street." The man's expression changed subtly at the mention of her name, though Cora couldn't interpret what she saw there. He sat carefully on the edge of the water trough and began to put on the shoes, his movements deliberate and respectful. As he stood, testing the fit, Cora noticed how the shoes transformed his entire bearing. He stood straighter, more confident, the pain in his expression easing considerably. "I am called Ayanna," he said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, "and I will not forget this kindness, Cora Whitman." But as Ayanna walked away, moving with renewed strength down the street, Cora had no idea that her simple act of compassion had just set in motion events that would change everything she thought she knew about her family, her town, and the mysterious connection between her father and this weathered elder, whose true identity remained hidden. Cora walked home barefoot, the rough dirt and scattered pebbles biting into her stockings with each step. The sensation was foreign and uncomfortable, but she felt a strange lightness in her chest that had nothing to do with her missing shoes. She kept glancing back down the street, hoping to catch another glimpse of Ayanna, but he had disappeared around the corner near the grain depot. When she reached the trading post, her father Fletcher was arranging bolts of fabric on the wooden counter. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, sorting the materials by color and quality. The familiar smell of leather goods and dried tobacco filled the small space, mixed with the sweet scent of molasses from the large barrels near the back wall. Fletcher looked up as the bell above the door chimed, his gray eyes immediately dropping to her feet. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to sharp concern in an instant. "Cora, where are your shoes?" His voice carried the tone of a man who had learned to expect trouble in this unpredictable territory. She stood in the doorway, suddenly aware of how her actions might appear to others. The shoes had cost her father considerably, and good leather was not something to be given away lightly in their circumstances. But the memory of Ayanna's grateful expression strengthened her resolve. "I gave them to someone who needed them more than I did," she said simply, stepping fully into the store and closing the door behind her. Fletcher set down the fabric bolt he had been holding, his full attention now focused on his daughter. "You gave them away. Cora, those shoes cost me 2 weeks of grain profits. Who did you give them to?" "An elderly native man. He was walking barefoot, and his feet were cut up and bleeding. He could barely walk." "Papa." Cora moved closer to the counter, her voice gaining confidence as she explained. "His name is Ayanna." The moment she spoke the name, her father's face went completely pale. The bolt of red fabric slipped from his fingers and tumbled to the floor, unrolling across the wooden planks. Fletcher gripped the edge of the counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Did you say Ayanna?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, Papa." "Do you know him?" Cora studied her father's reaction with growing confusion. She had never seen him look so shaken, not even during the harsh winter when their supplies had run dangerously low. Fletcher turned away from her, walking toward the window that faced the main street. His shoulders were tense, and Cora could see his reflection in the glass, his expression troubled and distant. "I knew someone by that name long ago," he said finally. "Before you were born, before we came to this town." "Was he a friend?" Cora pressed, sensing there was much more to this story than her father was willing to reveal. Fletcher remained silent for a long moment, staring out at the busy street where people continued their daily routines, unaware of the conversation taking place inside the trading post. "It's complicated, Cora," he said at last. Some friendships are tested by circumstances beyond our control. Some debts can never be repaid." But before Cora could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching hoofbeats filled the air, followed by urgent voices calling out in the native language. Something was happening in the street, and whatever it was, her father's expression suggested it was connected to the mysterious man she had just helped. Father and daughter rushed outside to find a group of native riders gathered in the center of the street. Their horses stamped restlessly as the men spoke in urgent, rapid tones. Townspeople emerged from shops and houses, forming a cautious circle around the gathering, their faces filled with the wariness that always accompanied unexpected visits. Cora recognized Ayanna immediately. He sat tall on a painted horse, no longer the limping, barefoot elder she had encountered earlier. Her brown leather shoes were visible on his feet, but everything else about him seemed transformed. The other riders looked to him with obvious respect, their body language suggesting he held considerable authority among them. "That's Chief McCoon's with him," Fletcher whispered, pointing to a broad-shouldered man with intricate beadwork across his vest. "And the others are tribal council members. This isn't a casual visit." Sheriff Morrison approached the group slowly, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. The lawman was known for his cautious approach to tribal relations, preferring diplomacy to confrontation whenever possible. "What brings you to town today?" Morrison called out, his voice carrying across the street. Ayanna dismounted carefully, and Cora noticed how her shoes seemed to give him confidence as his feet touched the ground. He walked forward with measured steps, his posture commanding respect despite his earlier vulnerability. "We seek Fletcher Whitman," Ayanna announced, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air. "There is something that must be settled between us." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd. Cora felt her father tense beside her, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. Several townspeople turned to look at them, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. "I'm here," Fletcher called out, stepping forward despite his obvious reluctance. "But this is not the time or place for old grievances, Ayanna." "Old grievances?" Ayanna's weathered face remained impassive, but something flickered in his dark eyes. "Is that what you call it, old friend?" The word friend hung in the air like a challenge. Cora watched the interaction with growing confusion, trying to piece together the history between these two men. Her father had clearly recognized Ayana's name, but the nature of their relationship remained mysterious. Chief Macoons dismounted as well, moving to stand beside Ayana. The tribal leader was younger but carried himself with the same dignity. When he spoke, his English was precise and formal. "The child gave shoes to one who had none," Macoon said, his gaze finding Cora in the crowd. "This act of kindness has been observed and discussed among our people." "It was just a simple gesture," Fletcher said quickly, his voice tight with tension. "Children don't understand the complexities of business relationships." "Business relationships?" Ayana's voice carried a note of something that might have been disappointment or anger. "Is that how you remember our time together, Fletcher?" Cora stepped forward, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "Papa, what is he talking about? How do you know each other?" The question seemed to hang in the air between the two men like an unspoken challenge. Around them, the crowd had grown larger, drawn by the unusual nature of the confrontation. Shopkeepers stood in their doorways, women gathered in small groups, and even the children had stopped their games to watch. Ayana looked directly at Cora, and she saw something like sadness in his ancient eyes. "Your father and I have history, young one. History that goes back to before you were born, to a time when the boundaries between our peoples were not so clearly drawn." "That was different," Fletcher said firmly. "That was survival. This is civilization." "And civilization means forgetting debts of honor?" Ayana asked quietly. But before Fletcher could respond, one of the younger tribal members whispered something urgent in Ayana's ear. The old man's expression immediately grew serious, and he turned back toward his horse with sudden purpose. "We will speak again soon, Fletcher Whitman," Ayana called over his shoulder. "There are things that must be resolved before the season changes." As the tribal group prepared to leave, Cora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the afternoon breeze. Whatever lay between her father and Ayana, it was far from over. As the tribal riders disappeared down the dusty road, the townspeople slowly dispersed, their conversations filled with speculation and concern. Fletcher stood motionless in the street, staring at the spot where Ayana had been, his face pale and drawn. "Papa," Cora said softly, tugging at his sleeve. "Please tell me what's happening. Why did he call you an old friend? What debt was he talking about?" Fletcher seemed to shake himself from his thoughts, looking down at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. "Come inside, Cora. We need to talk." Back in the trading post, Fletcher locked the door and turned the sign to closed, despite the afternoon hour. He moved to the back room where they kept their living quarters, gesturing for Cora to sit on the small wooden chair near the table. "What I'm about to tell you must stay between us," he began, his voice heavy with years of buried secrets. 15 years ago, before you were born, I wasn't a trader. I was a cavalry scout, working for the territorial government. Cora's eyes widened. Her father had never spoken about his life before settling in this town, always deflecting her questions with vague references to different times. "During a harsh winter, my unit got separated from the main force during a blizzard. We were lost, freezing, and running out of supplies. 3 men died in the first 2 days." Fletcher's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "We would have all perished if Ayana's people hadn't found us." "He saved you?" Cora asked, beginning to understand the weight of what her simple gesture might have represented. "More than saved us. They took us in for 3 months, shared their food when they had little, nursed us back to health. Ayana himself tended to my frostbitten feet every day, using traditional medicines that kept me from losing my toes." Fletcher paused, his voice becoming thick with emotion. "When spring came, they guided us back to civilization." "That sounds wonderful, Papa. Why haven't you ever told me?" Fletcher's expression darkened. "Because of what happened next. When I returned to my unit, I was ordered to file a report about the tribal territory we had seen, their numbers, their weaknesses. The information I provided was used to plan raids on their winter camps. The horrible truth began to dawn on Cora. You betrayed them. I was following orders," Fletcher said defensively, but his voice carried no conviction. "I told myself I had no choice, but Ayana's youngest son was killed in one of those raids, along with several other members of their tribe." Cora felt sick to her stomach. The kind, dignified man she had helped today had lost his child because of information her father had provided to the military. When Ayana learned the truth, he confronted me. I was preparing to leave the territory. to start a new life away from the military. He could have killed me, had every right to. Instead, he told me that someday I would have a chance to repay the debt of blood between us. And today? Cora whispered. Today you gave him back something I took away 15 years ago, Fletcher said quietly. Dignity, kindness without expectation of reward, the simple human compassion his people showed me when I was dying in the snow. A knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Cora could see a familiar figure waiting patiently in the afternoon shadows. Ayanna had returned, and this time, he was alone. Fletcher hesitated at the door, his hand frozen on the lock. Through the glass, Ayanna stood quietly, no longer the authoritative tribal leader from the street gathering, but once again the weathered elder who carried the weight of old sorrows. Open it, Papa, Cora said softly. He came back for a reason. With trembling fingers, Fletcher unlocked the door. Ayanna stepped inside without invitation, his movements careful and deliberate. The leather shoes Cora had given him squeaked softly against the wooden floor, a sound that seemed to fill the small space with significance. I sent the others away, Ayanna said simply. What needs to be said should be said between us alone. Fletcher nodded toward the chairs near the counter. Please, sit. Would you like coffee? Water? I would like truth, Ayanna replied, but he accepted the offered chair. 15 winters have passed since we last spoke. Fletcher, 15 winters since you chose duty over honor. I was a young man following orders, Fletcher said, but his voice lacked conviction. I didn't know what they planned to do with the information. Ayanna's dark eyes hardened. You knew enough. You knew that knowledge of our winter camps. Our numbers, our routines would be used against us. You chose to close your eyes to what your words would bring. Cora watched the exchange from beside the counter, her heart heavy with the weight of her family's hidden history. She thought of her simple act of kindness that morning, how natural it had felt to help someone in need. The contrast with her father's past actions was stark and painful. My son Chayton was only 16, Ayanna continued, his voice steady but filled with quiet grief. He died defending the children when your soldiers attacked our winter camp, the same children who had played with you during your stay with us. Fletcher's composure finally cracked. I've carried that guilt every day since. I left the military, changed my life, tried to make amends by treating all people fairly in my business dealings. And yet, you never sought us out to speak the words that needed speaking, Ayanna observed. You let time pass, hoping distance would erase the debt between us. What words could possibly make up for what happened? Fletcher asked desperately. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands resting on his knees. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different tone, something that might have been hope. Today, your daughter gave me shoes when I had none, not because she knew who I was, not because of any debt or obligation, but because she saw suffering and chose to act. In that moment, she showed me the man you could have been, the man you perhaps still are. Fletcher looked at his daughter with new understanding. She's always been kinder than I deserve. The question, Ayanna said, rising from his chair, is what you choose to do with the opportunity she has given us. What do you mean? Cora asked, speaking for the first time since Ayanna had entered. The elderly man smiled at her, the first genuine warmth she had seen from him. Your simple act today has reminded my people that not all settlers see us as enemies. The tribal council was prepared to end all trade relationships with this town, to move our people farther west, but your kindness has opened a different path. What kind of path? Fletcher asked. A path toward forgiveness, perhaps, toward healing old wounds instead of letting them fester. Ayanna moved toward the door, then paused. Tomorrow we hold a ceremony to honor the memory of those we have lost. You are invited to attend, Fletcher Whitman. Both of you. I don't understand, Fletcher said. After everything I've done, why would you want me there? Ayanna looked back at him with eyes that had seen too much sorrow and too little justice. Because sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to acknowledge it openly, to speak the names of the dead and let the living choose whether to carry hatred or seek a better way forward. But as he reached for the door handle, Ayanna's expression grew serious. Know this, Fletcher. The ceremony tomorrow will determine whether the debt between us can finally be settled, or whether it will pass to the next generation. Choose carefully. That evening, Fletcher sat at their small wooden table, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. The weight of Ayanna's invitation pressed down on him like a physical burden. Cora watched her father from across the room. Seeing him wrestle with demons, she was only beginning to understand. "You have to go, Papa," she said finally, breaking the heavy silence that had settled over their home. "It's not that simple, Cora. Attending a ceremony for the people I helped destroy, it feels like mockery. How can I stand among them and pretend I deserve forgiveness?" "You're not pretending," Cora said, moving to sit across from him. "You feel guilty because you did something terrible, but hiding from it won't bring back his son or heal anyone's pain." Fletcher looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "When did you become so wise?" "Maybe when I realized that doing the right thing isn't always comfortable." She reached across the table and placed her small hand over his weathered one. "You taught me to help people when they need it. Isn't that what you're being asked to do now? Help heal something you helped break?" Before Fletcher could respond, they heard voices outside their window. Peering through the glass, they saw several townspeople gathered in the street, their conversation animated and concerned. "I don't like it," Sheriff Morrison was saying to a group that included the banker and the general store owner. "Tribal ceremonies can get out of hand. What if this is some kind of setup?" "Whitman's always dealt fairly with everyone," replied Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house. "But if there's bad blood between him and that chief, it could spill over onto all of us." "Maybe we should discourage him from going," suggested the banker. "No point stirring up trouble with the natives over past grievances." Cora felt her stomach tighten as she listened to the conversation. The very people her father had served faithfully as a merchant were now ready to abandon him when he needed support most. "They're afraid," Fletcher said quietly, having heard the discussion as well. "And they have a right to be. My past could bring consequences on this entire town. Or your courage could bring healing," Cora countered. "Ayanna could have taken revenge on you years ago, but he didn't. He could have avoided this town entirely, but he chose to come here. Maybe he wants peace as much as you do." Fletcher stood and walked to the window, watching as the group of townspeople continued their worried debate. The irony wasn't lost on him that the same people who benefited from his honest business practices were now questioning his judgment. "There's something else, Cora," he said without turning around. "Ayanna mentioned that the tribal council was considering moving further west, ending all trade relationships with the town. If they do that, several businesses here will struggle to survive, including ours, especially ours. Nearly half our revenue comes from trading with the tribal communities in the region." The implications hit Cora like a cold wind. Her father's attendance at the ceremony wasn't just about personal redemption anymore. The economic survival of their town might depend on whether he could find the courage to face his past and somehow make amends for it. But as she watched her father's reflection in the window glass, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the distance, barely visible in the growing dusk, riders were approaching the town, and they weren't from Ayanna's peaceful delegation. The riders emerged from the twilight shadows like harbingers of trouble. Fletcher recognized them immediately. Territorial militia, the same type of unit he had once served with. Their leader was Captain Hayes, a man whose reputation for harsh dealings with tribal communities was well known throughout the territory. "Stay inside," Fletcher told Cora firmly, but she had already moved to peer through the curtains alongside him. Captain Hayes dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, his movements sharp and military precise. Even from a distance, his voice carried clearly in the evening air as he spoke with Sheriff Morrison. "We received reports of unusual tribal activity in this area," Hayes announced. "Large gatherings, ceremonial preparations. In my experience, such activities often precede coordinated attacks on settler communities." Sheriff Morrison, to his credit, maintained a calm demeanor. "The tribal representatives who visited today came in peace, Captain. They're planning a memorial ceremony, not a war council. Memorial ceremonies can quickly become war dances," Hayes replied coldly. "I'm here to ensure the safety of American citizens. We'll be establishing a temporary camp outside town tonight." Fletcher felt his stomach drop. The presence of aggressive militia forces could destroy any chance of reconciliation with Ayanna's people. Worse, it could provoke exactly the kind of conflict Hayes claimed to be preventing. "I have to warn Ayanna," Fletcher said, reaching for his coat. "Papa, no." Cora grabbed his arm. "If Captain Hayes sees you leaving town to meet with the tribal camp, he'll think you're conspiring with them." But Fletcher was already moving toward the door. "If I don't warn them, Hayes might attack their ceremony. Innocent people could die, just like before." "Then I'm coming with you," Cora said firmly. "Absolutely not." It's too dangerous. It's more dangerous if you go alone. If something happens to you, who will speak for us at the ceremony tomorrow? Cora's logic was sound, but Fletcher still hesitated. A sharp knock at their door interrupted the debate. Sheriff Morrison stood outside, his expression grim in the lamplight. "Fletcher, I need to speak with you," Morrison said as they opened the door. "Captain Hayes is asking questions about your relationship with the tribal leadership. He seems to think you might have information about their intentions." "What kind of information?" "The kind that could get you arrested if you give the wrong answers," Morrison said quietly. "Hayes believes there's a conspiracy brewing, and he's looking for someone to blame if things go wrong." Fletcher understood immediately. As a former cavalry scout with known connections to the tribal community, he would make a convenient scapegoat if Hayes needed to justify harsh actions. "What do you suggest I do?" "Keep your head down. Stay away from the tribal camp. Let me handle Hayes." Morrison paused, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "But Fletcher, if there's anything you need to tell those people, you'd better do it tonight. Hayes is planning to escort them out of the territory first thing in the morning." After Morrison left, Fletcher and Cora sat in stunned silence. The ceremony that could have healed old wounds would never happen if Hayes had his way. Worse, the forced removal of Ayanna's people could spark the very conflict the captain claimed to be preventing. "There's only one choice," Fletcher said finally. "I have to reach Ayanna tonight and convince him to leave peacefully before Hayes can provoke a confrontation. And if Captain Hayes catches you, then I'll face the consequences. But I won't let my past mistakes cause more bloodshed." As Fletcher prepared to leave, Cora made a decision that would prove to be the most important of the entire ordeal. She quietly slipped on her stockings and the old pair of boots she wore for chores, determined to follow her father into the night. Because if 15 years of guilt had taught her anything, it was that some debts could only be repaid through courage, and some healing could only happen when people were willing to risk everything for what was right. The memorial ceremony might be impossible now, but perhaps there was still time to prevent history from repeating its bloodiest chapters. Fletcher slipped out the back door of the trading post, moving carefully through the shadows between buildings. The tribal camp lay 2 miles north of town, near the river where Ayanna's people often made temporary settlements. The moon provided just enough light to navigate the familiar terrain. He had traveled less than half a mile when he heard footsteps behind him. Turning quickly, he found Cora following at a distance, her small form barely visible in the darkness. "I told you to stay home," he whispered urgently. "And I told you it was more dangerous to go alone," she replied, moving to walk beside him. "Besides, Ayanna trusts me. That might matter tonight." Despite his worry, Fletcher recognized the wisdom in her words. Together, they continued toward the river, the distant glow of campfires guiding their way. The tribal camp was smaller than Fletcher had expected. Perhaps 30 people gathered around several modest fires. Ayanna sat with the tribal council, their conversation quiet but intense. When the sentries announced Fletcher's approach, all conversation stopped. "You shouldn't have come," Ayanna said, rising to meet them. "Your captain friend has made his intentions clear. We received his warning an hour ago." "Then you know you need to leave tonight," Fletcher said urgently. "Hayes is looking for any excuse to justify violence. If you're still here in the morning, we will not be driven from our memorial ceremony by threats," Chief McCoons interrupted, his voice firm with resolve. "Our dead deserve to be honored." "Your living deserve to survive," Fletcher countered. "I've seen what men like Hayes can do. He'll attack first and justify it later." Cora stepped forward, her young voice carrying clearly in the night air. "What if there was another way? What if we held the ceremony somewhere Hayes couldn't interfere?" The adults looked at her with surprise, but Ayanna nodded thoughtfully. "Speak your idea, child." "The old mission ruins 5 miles east. It's neutral ground, abandoned but sacred to many people. If we could gather there at dawn, before Hayes realizes you've moved." "It could work," Ayanna said slowly, "but it would require trust from both sides. Your people would need to come as well." "Fletcher," to witness what needs to be said. Fletcher understood immediately. The ceremony wasn't just about honoring the dead anymore. It was about choosing between fear and understanding, between repeating old patterns of violence or forging a new path forward. "I'll bring whoever has the courage to come," Fletcher promised. 3 hours later, as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky, an extraordinary gathering took place among the crumbling walls of the old mission. Ayanna stood before a mixed assembly of tribal members and townspeople, including Fletcher, Cora, Sheriff Morrison, and even Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house. In a voice that carried both grief and hope, Ayanna spoke the names of the dead, his son Chayton among them. Then, in a gesture that stunned everyone present, he called Fletcher forward. "This man's daughter gave shoes to one who had none," Ayanna said, his weathered hand resting on Cora's shoulder. "In doing so, she reminded us that kindness can exist even where old wounds still bleed. Today, I choose to honor that reminder." Removing the brown leather shoes from his feet, Ayanna offered them back to Cora. "These have carried me through a night of difficult choices. Let them carry you toward a future where such choices are easier to make." But Cora shook her head gently. "Keep them, please. They look like they belong with you now." As the ceremony concluded with songs of remembrance and prayers for peace, Captain Hayes and his militia arrived at the empty tribal camp, finding nothing but cold ashes and the echo of wisdom that sometimes the greatest victories come not from force, but from the simple courage to choose compassion over fear. The debt between Fletcher and Ayanna would never be fully repaid, but on that morning, it was transformed into something new, a foundation for understanding that would benefit both communities for generations to come. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale, where courage and forgiveness collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.